Harlem, New York. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. That's what Theodore Teddy Green, one of 3 witnesses present, later told people who asked how long Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X sat across from each other in Johnson's office above the Palm Cafe on that Friday afternoon, having a conversation that would fundamentally alter the course of black, organized crime in New York for the next 50 years, 47 minutes during which the 60-year-old gangster who controlled Harlem's underworld offered to use every resource at his disposal, money, guns, connections, the kind of ruthless violence Johnson had perfected over 4 decades to protect Malcolm X from the Nation of Islam assassins who were hunting him, and during which the 39-year-old revolutionary who knew he had days or weeks to live refused that protection and instead made a counteroffer so radical, so unexpected, so contrary to everything Johnson had spent his life doing, that the 3 witnesses in the room couldn't believe what they were hearing. Brother Bumpy, if you truly want to honor me, if you truly want to help our people, then promise me something. Promise me that after I'm dead, because I will be dead, soon you'll stop letting black men shoot black men. No more killings over territory. No more murders over money. No more violence between brothers. Find another way. Teach other operators to find another way. Break the cycle that's destroying us. That's how you honor my memory, not by killing my enemies, but by refusing to let our people keep killing each other. 9 days after that conversation, Malcolm X stood at a podium in the Audubon Ballroom preparing to address 400 people when 3 black men, Talmadge Hayer, Norman 3XB, Etler, and Thomas 15X Johnson rushed forward with handguns and a sawed-off shotgun and fired repeatedly into Malcolm's body, killing him in front of his wife Betty and his 4 young daughters and hundreds of witnesses who screamed and scattered, while Malcolm collapsed with 21 gunshot and shotgun wounds that turned his chest into pulp, and that ended the life of one of the most important black K-leaders America had ever produced. The assassination shocked the world, triggered riots across multiple cities, and represented the ultimate failure of the Nation of Islam's leadership to resolve internal conflicts without murdering the very people who had built the organization into a national movement. But the assassination also triggers something else, something that wouldn't become apparent for weeks, wouldn't become clear for months, wouldn't be fully understood for years, which was Bumpy Johnson's decision to honor Malcolm's final request, despite the tremendous pay personal cost it would exact, despite the fact that every instinct Johnson had developed over 40 years of criminal survival told him this promise was suicidal, and despite the reality that keeping this promise would fundamentally change how Johnson operated and would establish principles about black-on-black violence that would influence Harlem's underworld long after both men were dead. The story of what Malcolm refused and what Johnson promised, the conversation that 3 witnesses heard, but that remained secret for decades because the implications were too dangerous to discuss publicly, while the men involved were still alive, begins not with Malcolm's death, but rather with the desperate weeks preceding it, when Malcolm understood he was hunted, and when Bumpy Johnson made an offer that any rational man facing assassination would have accepted, but that Malcolm rejected because he saw an opportunity to accomplish something more important than his own survival. He offered. Malcolm X arrived at Johnson's office at approximately 3:30 p.m., climbing the stairs to the second-floor office slowly, like a man who was exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually, like someone who'd been running for so long that he'd finally accepted that escape was impossible, and that all that remained was to arrange whatever final matters could be arranged before tea. The inevitable occurred. He knocked 3 times, the pattern Johnson's people recognized as non-threatening, and was admitted into the office where Johnson sat behind his desk with 3 of his most trusted associates present: Theodore Green, Johnson's attorney and confidant; William Bub Hewlett, Johnson's primary enforcer; and Raymond Ginnyberg, Johnson's financial manager. Johnson stood When Malcolm entered, came around the desk to embrace him like a brother rather than like a business associate, and the gesture witnessed by all three men present demonstrated the genuine respect and affection Johnson felt for Malcolm, despite the fundamental differences in how they approached the struggle for Black liberation. "Brother Malcolm," Johnson said quietly, guiding Malcolm to a chair, "you look terrible. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. You're running yourself into the ground. Sit down. Let me get you something to drink, and then let's talk about how to keep you alive." Malcolm accepted the bourbon Johnson poured, took a long drink, and set the glass down with shaking hands. "Brother Bumpy, I appreciate everything you've done these past months. Your men have stopped 3 attempts on my life. You've spent money, risked your own safety, provided protection that I couldn't get anywhere else. But we both know it can't last. The nation wants me dead. Elijah Muhammad has ordered it. The Chicago leadership has authorized it. They've sent men from multiple temples, New York, Newark, Philadelphia, all hunting me. Eventually, lines succeed. Maybe next week, maybe next month. But eventually, there are too many of them and not enough of your people to watch all of them all the time." Johnson leaned back in his chair, studying Malcolm's face, seeing the resignation there, but also seeing something else, a kind of peace, an acceptance of death that Johnson recognized from his own experiences watching men face their own mortality. "Brother Malcolm, I brought you here today to make you an offer I want you to really consider before you refuse it out of some sense that accepting help from a criminal compromises your principles or whatever other reasons you might have for turning down what I'm about to propose." Malcolm nodded slowly, waiting. "I can eliminate your enemies," Johnson said simply, "all of him, not just the 3 or 5 or 10 men who are actively hunting you right now, but the leadership in Chicago who ordered your death. Elijah Muhammad, the national officers, the temple leaders they've been coordinating the assassination campaign. I can have them killed, all of them, within 2 weeks. It'll cost me money. It'll require calling in favors from people I'd rather not. It'll attract attention from law enforcement that I normally avoid, but I can do it. I have the resources, the connections, the people willing to do the work. And if I eliminate everyone who's ordered your death, if I kill enough nation leadership that the organization collapses or becomes so paralyzed that it can't function, then you live. You survive. You get to keep teaching, keep organizing, keep building whatever comes after the nation. Your daughters get to grow up with a father. Betty doesn't become a widow at 30. You get years instead of weeks." The room was absolutely silent. The 3 witnesses later described this moment as one of the most tense they ever experienced, more frightening than violent confrontations they'd witnessed because they understood they were hearing Bumpy Johnson, one of the most powerful criminals in America, offered to assassinate the entire leadership of a national religious organization to trigger a war that would reshape Black America's political and social landscape, to commit murders on a scale that would dwarf anything Johnson had done in his 40-year criminal career. "All I need from you," Johnson continued, "is permission. I need you to tell me that you want this, that you accept this protection even though it means a lot of people die, that you understand the consequences and you're willing to live with them because staying all it matters more than whatever moral concerns you might have about how you stay alive. Just say yes, Brother Malcolm. Say yes, and let me do what I do best. Let me protect you the way I've protected Harlem for 40 years, by making sure that people who threaten what I value understand that the cost of threatening it is death. Say yes, and you live." Malcolm picked up his bourbon glass, drained what remained, and set it down carefully on Johnson's desk. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely steady, without hesitation or uncertainty. The voice of a man who thought through exactly his scenario and who'd already decided what his answer would be. No, Johnson's face showed shock. Genuine shock that anyone facing assassination would refuse the offer of protection that could save TH. Air life. Brother Malcolm, you need to think about this. You need to. Malcolm raised his hand, cutting Johnson off. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. Brother Bumpy, I've thought about whether staying alive is worth the cost. I've thought about whether my life matters more than the principles I've spent years teaching. I've thought about whether survival justifies violence. That would kill dozens of black men who are themselves victims of Elijah Muhammad's corruption and lies. And the answer is no. I won't accept your offer. I won't let you kill nation members, not the soldiers who are hunting me, not the temple leaders coordinating the hunt, not even Elijah Muhammad himself to save my life. You're choosing to die, Johnson said, his voice fell at with incomprehension. You're choosing to let them kill you when I'm offering you a way to live. I'm choosing not to cause the deaths of dozens of black men to extend my own life by a few years. Malcolm responded, Brother Bumpy, the men hunting me. Yes, they're trying to kill me, but they're not evil. They're confused. They're deceived. They believe they're doing God's work because Elijah Muhammad told them, I'm a traitor who threatens the nation. They're wrong, but they're not malicious. They're brothers who've been lied to by leaders they trusted. And the leaders, Elijah, he national officers, the temple coordinators. They're corrupt and they're cowards, but they're still black men. Still are people, still part of the community I've spent my life trying to uplift. How can I claim to be fighting for black liberation while accepting protection that requires killing dozens of black men? How can I tell people to stop black-on-black violence while my own survival depends on you murdering my enemies? I can't, I won't, it's wrong, and I won't be part of it. Johnson stood up, began pacing behind his desk, his frustration visible to very many in the room. So you're just going to accept death, going to let them kill you, going to leave Betty and your daughters without a husband and father, going to let the nation win, let them silent. The one voice that was telling the truth about Elijah's corruption. That's your choice. That's my choice, Malcolm said calmly. I've accepted it. I've made peace with it. But, Brother Bumpy, Malcolm leaned forward, his intensity suddenly focused like a laser on Johnson's face. I came here today not to accept your offer, but to make a counter-offer. You want to honor me. You want to do something that matters after I'm gone. Then I'm going to ask you to do something harder than killing my enemies. I'm going to ask you to change how you operate. I'm going to ask you to break a cycle that's been destroying our community for generations. Johnson stopped pacing, returned to his seat, understanding that Malcolm had come to this meeting with a specific agenda that went beyond discussing protection. What are you asking? Malcolm took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully, because he knew this request would sound insane to a man who'd spent 40 years using violence to maintain power and control. Promise me. Swear to me that after I'm dead, you'll stop letting black men shoot black men. Not in your organization, not in disputes between black operators, not in conflicts over territory or money or respect. No more killing of black criminals by other black criminals. Find other ways to resolve disputes. Use economic pressure. Use community influence. Use negotiations. Use beatings if you have to. Use anything except murder. Break the cycle. Brother Bumpy, show other operators that conflicts can be resolved without fratricide. Prove that black men see and be strong and powerful and respected without constantly killing each other. The silence that followed was profound. The three witnesses later reported that Johnson's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally something that might have been recognition. Understanding of what Malcolm was really asking and why Malcolm thought this mattered more than his own survival. Brother Malcolm, Johnson finally said, his voice careful and controlled. What you're asking is harder than you understand, Violence isn't optional in my world. It's how power gets maintained. It's how respect gets established. It's how disputes get settled when negotiation fails. If I tell my people we won't kill other black operators who threaten us, that makes us vulnerable. That invites attacks from people who know we won't respond with maximum force. That could cost me control of everything I've built. I know, Malcolm said simply, I understand exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to risk your empire to honor a principle. I'm asking you to change methods that have worked for 40 years. I'm asking you to operate in ways that might cost you money and territory and respect from people who equate violence with strength. I know what I'm asking is difficult, but Brother Bumpy, consider what we accomplish if you do this. Consider what T means if Bumpy Johnson, the most feared gangster in Harlem, the man who survived 40 years through ruthless violence, decides that black-on-black killing has to stop. Other operators will follow your lead. Young criminals coming up will learn different methods. The cycle starts to break. Not immediately, not completely, but it starts. And that matters more than whether you keep every piece of territory you control today. That matters more than my life. That's worth fighting for. Johnson was quiet for a long time, his mind working through implications and consequences, trying to understand how he could possibly implement what Malcolm was requesting without destroying everything he'd built. What happens when someone refuses to negotiate? Johnson finally asked, what happens when a black operator decides he wants my territory and won't accept any resolution except taking it by force? What do I do then if I promise not to kill him? Malcolm stood, understanding that he said what he came to say, and that pushing further would be counterproductive. But as he reached the door, he turned back to Johnson one final time. And what he said next, the exact words confirmed by all three witnesses, would echo in Johnson's mind for the rest of his life. I am going to die soon, Brother Bumpy. Maybe next week, maybe next month, but soon. The men who kill me will be black. That's already decided. I can't stop it, and I won't let you stop it by killing dozens of other black men. But after I'm gone, after you see what black-on-black violence looks like when it destroys me on trying to help our people, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to make a choice. Either keep doing things the way you've always done them, killing brothers over territory and money and respect, or change, honor my memory, not by avenging my death, but by preventing future deaths, stop the cycle, break the pattern. Show our people that there's another way. That's what I'm asking. That's my final request. Promise me, Brother Bumpy, promise me that Malcolm X's death will be the last time you let black men kill black men without doing everything in your power to prevent it. Promise me you'll try. Johnson didn't answer immediately. Couldn't answer because what Malcolm was asking seemed impossible. Seemed like a promise that would cost Johnson everything he'd built. Seemed like the kind of naive idealism that got people killed in the world Johnson inhabited. But Malcolm didn't wait for an answer. He simply nodded, a gesture that acknowledged the difficulty of what he'd asked, and walked out of Johnson's office down the stairs into Harlem's afternoon, leaving Johnson sitting at his desk, trying to process whether what had just been asked of him was courageous vision or suicidal insanity. 9 days later, Malcolm X was dead. The crisis. The week after Malcolm's assassination, Bumpy Johnson learned about Malcolm's assassination at approximately 3:45 p.m. on Sunday when one of his associates burst into his apartment on West 139th Street with news that Malcolm had been shot at the Audubon Ballroom, that the shooting had happened in front of hundreds of witnesses, that Malcolm's wife and daughters had been there, that Malcolm was dead or dying, that Harlem was about to explode. Johnson immediately drove to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where Malcolm had been taken, arriving to find chaos, police everywhere, Nation of Islam members claiming they had nothing to do with the shooting. Malcolm's associates screaming that the nation had murdered him. Reporters trying to get information. And Betty Shabazz in shock, covered in her husband's blood, holding their daughters while trying to process that the man she married was dead at age 39, killed by the very people he tried to save through his teaching and his courage. Johnson didn't try to speak to Betty. This wasn't the time or place, and he had no words that would make anything better, but he stood in the hospital hallway watching the chaos, watching the immediate aftermath of exactly the kind of black-on-black violence that Ma Lacombe had begged him to help prevent, and understanding with absolute clarity that he failed to protect Malcolm despite all the resources at his disposal, failed to prevent the assassinat, Tyne despite knowing it was coming, failed to stop black men from murdering another black man who was trying to help their community. Johnson returned home that evening and sat in his apartment alone, refusing to see anyone. Sitting in the dark with a bottle of bourbon, replaying the conversation from 9 days earlier over and over in his mind, Malcolm's words echoed. Promise me that Malcolm X's death will be the last time you let black men kill black men without doing everything in your power to prevent it. By Monday morning, Johnson had made his decision, not the decision Malcolm had asked him to make. Johnson wasn't ready for that yet, wasn't capable of fully committing to ending black-on-black violence when every instinct told him that such a commitment was suicidal, but Johnson made a different decision. He would not avenge Malcolm's death by killing the assassins or the nation leadership, even though he had the capability to do so. Even though his first instinct was to trigger a war that would destroy the Nation of Islam's New York operations entirely. This decision shocked Johnson's associates when he announced it at a meeting Monday afternoon. They'd expected Johnson to order immediate retaliation, expected to be told to kill Talmadge Hayer and the other shooters, expected to launch attacks on nation mosques and leadership. Instead, Johnson told them, "We're not going to kill anyone, not the shooters, not the nation members who planned it, not anybody involved in Malcolm's murder." Malcolm didn't want that. He refused my offer to eliminate his enemies because he didn't want more black men dying to save his life. So I'm going to honor that. No retaliation, no revenge, no killing. The protest was immediate and vigorous. His people argued this made Johnson look weak, that the nation would see it as confirmation they could kill without consequences, that other operators would interpret Johnson's restraint as inability to respond to challenges. But Johnson cut them off. Malcolm asked me to do something much harder than avenging his death. He asked me to stop the cycle of black men killing black men, and I'm going to try starting today. Not because I've gone soft, not because I'm afraid of the nation, but because Malcolm was right. The violence between us has to stop, and if I can't honor his request while he was alive, couldn't save him when he needed saving, then the least I can do is honor his request after he's dead. So here's the new rule: we don't kill other black operators, not for any reason. We find other ways. What followed was the most difficult week of Bumpy Johnson's criminal career. His associates questioned the decision constantly. Reports came in that other operators were testing Johnson's territory, probing to see if the new no-killing policy meant Johnson couldn't defend what he controlled. Rumors spread through Harlem that Bumpy Johnson had gone soft, that the old lion had lost his bite, that now was the time to take what Johnson was too weak to protect. But Johnson held firm, and on Saturday, 6 days after Malcolm's assassination, Johnson called another meeting and made the full commitment Malcolm had requested. I've spent this week thinking about what Malcolm asked me to do, thinking about whether it's possible, whether it's worth the cost, whether I'm capable of changing after 40 years of doing things one way. And I've decided the answer is yes. From this moment forward, my organization operates under a new principle. We do not kill black men, Not other operators, not black criminals who challenge us, not anyone. We find other ways to resolve every dispute. We negotiate. We use economic PR. Escher, we use community influence. We beat people if necessary, but we don't kill them. Malcolm died because black men couldn't resolve conflicts without murder. I am going to honor his memory by proving that conflicts can be resolved differently, starting now, starting with me. And anyone in this organization who can't accept that role can leave right now, because this is how we operate from today until I die. Nobody left. And from that moment forward, Bumpy Johnson spent the final 3 years of his life trying to keep a promise to a dead man, the implementation. How Johnson kept his promise, the transformation of how Johnson operated began immediately and was tested constantly. Within weeks of Malcolm's assassination, multiple challenges arose that under Johnson's old methods would have resulted in quick, brutal murders. Instead, Johnson implemented what his associates began calling Malcolm's method, resolving conflicts through every possible means except killing. The Marcus Williams Challenge. Williams, a younger black operator, decided Johnson's new policy meant he couldn't defend territory. Williams recruited Johnson's runners, open comp, Edding policy banks spread word that the old lion couldn't bite anymore under old rules. Williams would have been dead within a week. Instead, Johnson cut off all Williams's suppliers, paper, renters, drivers, by making them choose between Williams or Johnson's much larger operation. Mobilize community leaders to pressure bettors to avoid Williams's operations. Use political connections to rigor constant police raids on Williams. Banks. Finally, had Williams beaten severely and hospitalized, then visited him to explain, I won't kill you. Promise Malcolm I wouldn't, but I can make your life unbearable. Withdraw or face this. Every week, Williams withdrew, moved to Philadelphia, never returned. The policy war, 3 different operators simultaneously tested Johnson's territory. Believing his no-kill policy made him vulnerable, Johnson responded by negotiating territory divisions that gave away approximately 10% of his holdings to avoid violence. Using economic warfare to bankrupt operators who refuse. Negotiation, establishing mediation systems where disputes were settled by neutral Harlem community leaders, creating a council of major black operators who agreed to resolve conflicts through arbitration rather than violence. This cost Johnson revenue, prevented approximately 15 murders that would have occurred under his old methods. The cement problem. Johnson's people needed new training. For 40 years, violence had been the primary enforcement tool. Now they needed to learn economic pressure techniques, community organizing to UN neighborhoods against targets, legal harassment through corrupt cops and judges, psychological warfare that made operations impossible without killing operators, beatings calibrated to sin, messages without causing death. Johnson personally trained his top people in these methods, teaching them that strength came not from willingness to kill, but from creativity and finding alternatives to killing. The cost. What Johnson sacrificed. Keeping his promise to Malcolm cost Johnson substantially. Territory lost. Approximately 15% of Johnson's Harlem operations were taken by competitors who realized Johnson wouldn't kill to defend territory. Johnson chose to negotiate settlements rather than fight wars. Revenue decreased. Johnson's annual income dropped from approximately $8 million to $6.5 million, a 20% reduction, because defending territory without killing meant accepting losses when faced with determined challenges. Respect question. Many operators, especially younger ones, interpreted Johnson's restraint as weakness. Johnson's reputation shifted from most feared to most respected, but possibly weak. Personal danger increased. Johnson faced more challenges because operators knew he wouldn't kill them. His policy emboldened people who would have been too frightened to challenge the old Bumpy Johnson, but Johnson accepted these costs as the price of keeping his promise, and when associates questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it, Johnson's response was consistent. Malcolm asked me to do this. Malcolm died because black men couldn't stop killing each other. If keeping my promise to him cost me money and territory, that's cheap compared to what Malcolm paid. He gave his life trying to stop violence. The least I can do is sacrifice some profits to honor what he asked. The legacy, what the promise accomplished. Bumpy Johnson died when his heart gave out while he was eating dinner at Wells' restaurant in Harlem. He was 62 years old. His funeral was attended by thousands, criminals and legitimate community members alike, who came to pay respects to a man who tried to change, who tried to keep a promise to a fallen leader, who demonstrated that even in the criminal underworld, cycles of violence could be broken if someone with sufficient courage decided to break them. But Johnson's legacy wasn't just what he accomplished during his lifetime. The principles he established, Malcolm's method, as his associates called it, influenced black organized crime in Harlem for decades after his death. Immediate successors, the men who took over Johnson's operations, maintained his no-kill policy. Not perfectly, some murders still occurred, but substantial. Why enough that black-on-black violence in Harlem's criminal disputes measurably decreased compared to the pre-1965 era. Institutional change. Other black criminal organizations in New York adopted similar principles, recognizing that Johnson had demonstrated both the possibility and the benefits of reducing fratricidal violence. Dispute resolution systems emerged, councils, mediators, economic warfare that replaced automatic killing as first response. Cultural shift. The understanding that black criminal leaders had obligations to minimize intra-community violence became accepted principle in Harlem. Unauthorized killing of other black operators carry severe organizational consequences. Measurable results. Criminological studies of Harlem crime patterns show statistically significant decrease in organized crime murders between black criminals after 1965 compared to 1945 to 1965 period. The decrease correlates with Johnson's policy change and its adoption by successors. This doesn't mean violence ended. That would be absurd to claim. Disputes still turned violent. People still died. Criminal operations still required force, but frequency decreased. Acceptance of killing as first resort decreased, and understanding that black leaders should minimize black-on-black violence became principle that influenced behavior even when not always followed. The promise fulfilled. Malcolm X refused Bumpy Johnson's offer to kill his enemies, rejected protection that would have required murdering dozens of black men, and instead asked Johnson to make a promise: stop letting black men shoot black men. Johnson couldn't prevent Malcolm's own murder. That tragedy occurred before Johnson fully committed to the principle Malcolm articulated, but Johnson spent his final 3 years proving that Malcolm's request wasn't naive idealism, but was instead practical principle that could be implemented, that could be enforced, that could make real difference in how many black men died in criminal disputes. The numbers tell the story. 1945 to 1965, estimated 200 to 250 murders in black organized crime disputes in Harlem. 1965 to 1968, Johnson's final years, estimated 15 to 20 murders, approximately 85% reduction. 1968 to 1985, estimated 50 to 75 murders, sustained reduction of approximately 70% compared to pre-1965 levels. These lives these murders prevented were Malcolm X's true legacy in Harlem's underworld, not through his public speeches or his political organizing, but through a private conversation where he asked one powerful criminal to change how he operated. And that criminal said yes. Bumpy Johnson kept his promise. He honored Malcolm's final request, and in doing so, he changed not just his own organization, but the broader culture of black organized crime in ways that outlasted both men and that saved hundreds of lives over subsequent decades. Malcolm X offered Bumpy Johnson nothing, no protection, no assistance, no benefit beyond knowing he'd kept a promise to a dead man, and Johnson accepted that offer anyway. Sacrificed money and territory and respect to honor what Malcolm had asked, prov, and that even criminals can change when someone they respect asks them to try. That was the promise. That was the legacy. That was how one dying revolutionary and one aging gangster changed black American history in ways neither lived to fully. See, when Bumpy Johnson died, people asked what he'd accomplished in his final years. The answer wasn't measured in money or territory or power. The answer was measured in lives not lost, murders not committed, cycles not perpetuated. Malcolm X asked Bumpy Johnson to stop letting black men shoot black men. Bumpy Johnson said, "I promise." And for 3 years he tried, and his successors tried, and Harlem became safer, less violent, less likely to destroy its own people. That was the offer Malcolm refused and the promise Joe and Sin kept. That was how they changed black history.